Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Wednesday, July 1st, 2020. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the latest film and TV news. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm the senior writer at slashfilm.com, and I'm joined on today's episode by Slash Film weekend editor Brad Oman
Hey, that's me.
and writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
All right, guys, so let's just dive right into the news today. Brad, tell us about a pretty significant change for the long-running animated comedy The Simpsons.
Yeah, so The Simpsons has recently faced some controversy after a documentary came out chronicling the impact that the stereotype of the character Apu from the show has created regarding Indian people. And there was even a request that Hank Azaria should step down from voicing the role as a white actor portraying an Indian character. And they ended up making the change. Hank Azaria stepped away from the role and would no longer voice Apu. But now, in recent weeks, there has been an effort by creators of animated programming to stop having white voice actors voice any characters of color whatsoever, so that they can give these roles to actors of color and voice them, since it's important to have representation not just of the characters but of the people portraying them. So The Simpsons made a broad sweeping statement to say that they will no longer have any white actors voice any characters of color on the show anymore. So that not only includes the change they've already made to have Hank Azaria not voice Apu, but it also includes not having Harry Shearer do the voice of Dr. Hibbert. And he also Hank Azaria also voiced the character of Carlton Carlson, who is one of Homer's friends that he sees at the bar and at work all the time. So he won't be voicing that character anymore. Tress MacNeille also voices Dr. Hibbert's wife, Bernice, and Apu's wife, and Julia. And so neither of those characters will be voiced by anymore either. So they're going to, I don't know if they're going to, they didn't make any specific statements about whether or not they would be finding actors to replace those characters quickly, or if it's something they'll address whenever those characters come up, because a lot of those characters are minor characters that appear every now and then. They're not necessarily in every episode of the series, but I imagine that when the time comes, they will find people to voice those characters as they're needed.
So you mentioned that this was something that's happening, sort of in the animation space right now. Do you know any other examples off the top of your head of like recent shows and stuff that have made similar proclamations or specific characters or anything like that?
You mean like so broadly, or?
Well, I think Family Guy has one, and then maybe was it? I guess there was I know there was a big conversation surrounding Bojack Horseman recently, and that conversation had sort of been happening for years, while the show was on, and so I know this is like an ongoing conversation in the animation community.
Yeah, there were. So actually one thing that happened just before The Simpsons made this decision was that Mike Henry, who has voiced Cleveland Brown on Family Guy since the beginning of the show back in 1999. He decided to step down from voicing the character. And that's a character that was given his own spin-off series for a while. And so now they'll find somebody to replace him. That one seems like it's going to be somewhat of a challenge, because obviously there are tons of talented voice actors out there, but Cleveland Brown's voice is such a unique one that it'll be interesting to see how they handle it, and if they find somebody that matches his voice well enough to do that. But some other cast members that stepped away: Jenny Slate will no longer be voicing Missy on Big Mouth. Kristen Bell's character on Central Park will also now be voiced by a different actor. They were both voicing mixed race characters, and so they'll be replaced. Although series co-creator Josh Gad said that Kristen Bell will get a different role on the series when she's replaced out there, but we don't know what's going on with Jenny Slate for Big Mouth yet.
Mm-hmm. So what do you make of all this, Brad? Do you think that this, I'm sure there are going to be some people who are listening to this who are like, who call themselves purists or something in terms of like these shows that they've been watching for years and years, and like they don't like the idea of their precious voice actors, like things changing slightly. But it sounds like you think this is a long time coming, or has been a long time coming.
Yeah, it's something that really never should have happened to begin with. It's one of those things where it feels like it's weird for this to change, but it's kind of this. It's one of the pieces of systemic racism that has been present in Hollywood. Like for some reason, we think it's okay, for white actors to voice characters of color just because they're not being seen as those characters in physical embodiment in live action. But it's not much different. So at the end of the day, what it comes down to is, there are plenty of actors of color out there, whether they're Black, Hispanic, Asian, who deserve to have these roles rather than having white actors pretend to be a different race. And I've seen some people online complaining like, oh yeah, I guess we shouldn't let actors act anymore. And it's like, that's not the same thing, man. And it's like, and if you're saying that, then you're implying that whenever a white person voices a white character, that they're not acting. So people need to grow up, and like, this is a change that needs to happen. Like, it's it'll be weird because we might hear a voice change slightly because of it, but representation matters both in the form of characters and in the form of the actors who play them.
Well said. All right, so let's move on to our next topic, which is the Sundance Film Festival. Chris, recently Sundance made an announcement about what the festival is planning for 2021. And with the pandemic and everything, what exactly is the Sundance Film Festival going to look like next year?
It's not going to look like it normally does. Even though Sundance is still months away, and some people would love to believe that, everything's going to be A-okay in a few months, it really doesn't look like things are improving anytime soon. So rather than, wait to the last minute, Sundance is planning ahead. They're going to have an online component for the first time ever. And they're also going to have screenings in cinemas across the country, not just in Utah, which, again, those are two things that just have never happened before. The details are still being worked out. There's not like 100% certainty of if every movie is going to be available online or if only certain things are, but that's the way things are going. And a lot of other film festivals are doing things like this too. Like TIFF recently announced they're making all 50 films they're going to have this year available online, which is a big deal because, no one's really done that before. So it's just the way things are going at this particular time.
I had not heard that about TIFF, and that was actually going to be my question to you was, do you think that Sundance will make all of their movies available? Because I remember when South by Southwest got shut down, only like a very, very small selection of movies were made available online, I think through Amazon or something. And there was like this big outcry from, some of the filmmakers talking about how, seeing movies online in that way just isn't the same as like the full-fledged festival experience, and it might actually like financially hurt them to have those movies available. But if a big festival like TIFF ahead of Sundance has made that sort of proclamation and made that decision to make all of its its entire slate available online, do you think that Sundance is going to sort of fall into line there and use go into their jet stream, or do you think that maybe like Sundance might hold, several of like the biggest movies just for in-person screenings? Because you mentioned they are going to be having some in-person stuff as well too. So what do you think it's going to look like exactly?
Yeah, it's tough to say because, like you mentioned, the South by Southwest thing, there was such a pushback against putting it all online, but that was also at the beginning of the pandemic, and everyone had rose-colored glasses on, and they assumed that, the United States government would actually be on top of this and fix things in time. And of course that didn't happen. And things have just gotten steadily worse since then. So I do think it's definitely possible to have a shift in that mentality where once there was the thought of, we just need to wait and hold fast until movie theaters open again. And now we're at this point where, some people still think, movie theaters will open soon. Warner Brothers really wants to open Tenet by August, but it's day by day, it seems less and less likely that movie theaters are going to be back to normal anytime soon. So I would not be surprised if Sundance did put everything online. TIFF, I guess TIFF is different because it's outside the US, so they have that to consider. But yeah, Sundance attracts people from all over the world too. So I would not be surprised if they end up just accepting that they have to put everything online.
Brad, do you think that that's going to be sort of the new normal for film festivals until we get a vaccine or until this thing is like quote unquote over? Do you think that I guess there's no reason for anybody to physically travel to Salt Lake City and Park City, if there is, if you can, access this stuff online, like you wouldn't be planning a trip to go there just to get that sort of like in-person festival feeling when the movies are available online.
It's interesting because like my first question about this is whether or not having a festival where all of the entries end up online will reduce the quality or number of movies that are premiering or that are part of the festival, because a lot of filmmakers want to see their movie on the big screen and want people to see it in a theater, and may not be too keen on it being distributed, through a festival online, even though it gets a lot more people the ability to see it. And especially with a festival like Sundance, really any festival, they have, premieres of bigger movies there, not just indies that haven't been seen before. And so I wonder, will those movies be only sent out to like press who are credited for the festival, and there'll be reviews that drum up buzz, or will those movies also be available for everyone to see at a certain time, essentially given a VOD release? So I definitely have those kinds of questions, and like I'm torn about whether or not I would still want to travel to somewhere like that, because personally for me, it works out because my girlfriend still has some family who lives over near Park City, Utah. So it would kind of be a convenient thing, I guess, to go and kind of kill two birds with one stone. But I also want to see these movies in theaters as opposed to watching them at home. Obviously I have a good entertainment system. I've got surround sound, and I have a big flat screen TV, like a super cool dude. But I still like that theatrical experience, especially at film festivals. It's film festivals feel different even than from seeing movies in regular theaters. Just there's a different kind of buzz and something special about being among the first people to see it with no real pretense as to whether it's going to be good or not. You just hope for the best. So I don't know. I'm interested to see how it plays out. But like I said, the film library that will be available is my biggest question at this point.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's move on to our next topic, which is The Mandalorian. So this show is coming back. It's supposed to be coming back later on this year for a second season. But Brad, recently Lucasfilm just made an announcement about what else fans have in store regarding The Mandalorian. Why don't you tell us about that?
Indeed. The first season has been over since December. And beyond some merchandise here and there, especially of Baby Yoda, there hasn't really been much tied to The Mandalorian as there usually is with other Star Wars properties. And that especially includes books. But that is about to change because Lucasfilm announced the first wave of books tied to the first season of The Mandalorian will be on the way starting later this year. And one of the first ones is a book that a lot of us have been waiting for, because it will be The Art of the Mandalorian for the first season. And the credits for every episode of The Mandalorian featured some incredible concept art that was used for the planning of the show. And I have been hoping for a while that they were going to collect that art into a book. And so they are doing that. That will be arriving in December. But more intriguingly, one of the books that is available is an original novel that will be written by Adam Christopher. Unfortunately, we don't have any idea what the story will be for this novel. And it's originally we were thinking that it might be just an adult novelization of the series, but it does specifically list at being an original novel on StarWars.com. What makes it all the more interesting is that we've heard from our own sources that Jon Favreau, the executive producer of the series, hasn't been too keen on having other writers craft stories that are tied to The Mandalorian, because he doesn't want to have to worry about having these problems clashing with canon for the show, or adhering to something that they didn't necessarily have a hand in, making specifically so that it works with what they have planned for the show.
Interesting.
But, but there's a good chance, obviously this is only one original book. I wouldn't be surprised if they were able to work with the writer and be like, okay, here's what you can do, here's what we have available, and make it work. But I feel like maybe it won't be something that happens as commonly as it does with books that are tied to the larger Star Wars universe.
Yeah, I wonder, do you think that there's a chance to have, I don't know, like in world Mandalorian books and stuff like that that just don't have any significant impact on the larger story? Like, today we just wrote about the release date for Star Trek Lower Decks, which is an animated comedy coming up that is about like it doesn't have anything to do with the bridge crew. It's all about like the characters that like aren't even important enough to show up in the background of a regular Star Trek show. They're like buried in, a whole different level of the ship, like that kind of thing. Do you think that there's room for that kind of storytelling in, I guess, in a manner where it wouldn't impact anything that Favreau and his team are going to be doing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge roster of characters who don't have anything important to do, in the Star Wars saga. And considering the world of the Mandalorian and how many bounty hunters there are, it wouldn't be hard to have stories about other bounty hunters who don't have direct confrontations with the Mandalorian and only are tangentially, tied to the story because they were maybe, once in pursuit of Baby Yoda or something like that, So I wouldn't be surprised if they did something like that. But I feel like having an abundance of stories with any of the main characters is probably unlikely at this point.
Yeah. Okay, so our next story is maybe one of the funniest movie news stories that I've heard in a little while, and that is that Jason Momoa, of course, the star of Aquaman, is going to be lending his voice to Frosty the Snowman in a new movie. And this is not going to be an animated movie. This is going to be a live action CG hybrid Frosty the Snowman film. So David Barenbaum is writing the screenplay. If you don't recognize his name, don't worry. I didn't either. He wrote The Haunted Mansion starring Eddie Murphy. He also wrote this 2006 superhero movie that I completely forgot existed called Zoom, which some of you may have seen. But he also has some experience writing holiday-themed movies because he is the sole credited screenwriter of Jon Favreau's Elf. So he is going to be writing the script for this Frosty the Snowman live-action movie. Like, I really cannot believe it is a real thing that's happening. But Warner Brothers is making this as like a real thing, and Jason Momoa, of all people, is going to be quote-unquote embodying a CGI version of Frosty. So I don't know if that means that he's actually going to be doing physical like motion capture work or just providing the voice. I really, 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 really hope that it's motion capture stuff, because I honestly think that the behind the scenes footage of Jason Momoa wearing like a giant performance capture suit on the sets doing ridiculous Frosty the Snowman things would be incredibly entertaining to watch. John Berg and Greg Silverman and Jeff Johns, who all worked on sort of building Warner Brothers DC extended universe together, are sort of reuniting to produce this movie. And guys, I gotta go around the circle here and get your thoughts on a Jason Momoa Frosty the Snowman movie. Chris, what do you think?
I'm very excited for this. I can't wait to see. It's at the top. It's at the top of my must see list.
I can't tell if you're being serious, Chris. What do you really think about this?
I am genuinely curious about the Jason Momoa Frosty the Snow. I'm guessing he's gonna have a serious attitude problem, and he'll like skateboard or something, and I have to see that.
Brad, what do you think?
I mean, I want to see it just because I know this is going to be one of the weirdest things ever, and will probably be very bad based on the filmography of who is working on it. At the same,
you don't have any faith that the Elf guy can churn out a Frosty the Snowman movie that's good?
I mean, I don't know. They've already made a mistake by not calling this movie Jacked Frost. So, I mean, I think when you're lacking that much creativity, the only way to go is down.
All right, fair enough. I guess speaking of going down, well, I don't know. Maybe this is a slight uptick from what we've expected from the franchise that we're about to talk about. But a new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie is coming. Brad, give us the details on that.
Yeah, I actually think this is great news because the recent Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies have left a lot to be desired. But yesterday, Nickelodeon made an announcement out of nowhere that they're working on a brand new, fully computer animated theatrical movie for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that will be created by Seth Rogen, Evan Goldberg, and James Weaver through their Point Grey Productions banner. It will be directed by Jeff Rowe, who works on Gravity Falls and the upcoming movie Connected that's being produced by Lord & Miller. and it's written by Brendan O'Brien, who wrote Neighbors for Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg. So for me, I think this is awesome because there has been one Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles computer animated movie before, and it was okay. Just because it kind of had the dynamic between the characters right, but I didn't necessarily like the story too much. But in this case, I think that these characters are kind of perfect for Rogen and Goldberg. Point Grey did a good job with their producing The Boys for Amazon Prime. It's obviously it's not everybody's cup of tea because it's a bit of a darker kind of comic book adaptation. But with the Ninja Turtles, since they are these teenage dudes who like to eat pizza and bust each other's chops, but also fight crime, I can see Rogen and Goldberg's comedic sensibilities really working here. So I'm down to see what they can do with a property like this because Ninja Turtles is in need of a good theatrical reboot. There were some nice creative touches in the most recent 2D animated series, Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that just launched a little while back. But I think a new, big theatrical production from a major studio is probably better.
So, Brad, I don't know the specific details here, but please correct me if I'm wrong if you happen to know them. But didn't the Ninja Turtles start out as a comic book that was kind of dark and maybe even like a parody of some of the stuff that was going on in comics at that time? So, like, if that's the case, I can see what you're talking about here. Do you know if that's true?
Yeah, it's the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was a comic book first, and it did have a thing where like it had darker sensibilities, but it also kind of satirized them in a way. And that's one of the things that actually, kind of makes the original movie, live action movie, so good, is that it has this, surprisingly gritty element to it because it really feels grounded, and somehow the idea of these four anthropomorphic teenage turtles fighting crime doesn't feel completely ridiculous. Just because of how good the the puppeteering effects were, and the practical prosthetic suits, and the voice acting, and the martial arts action was fantastic. To this day that stuff holds up, and that original movie is great. But it also has a little bit of silliness to the proceedings, which was unfortunately increased a little too much in the sequels once they realized, oh, kids love this shit. So since this is coming from Nickelodeon, there's always a possibility that it probably won't veer too much, into that darker area that made the original movie so good. But I think, like you said too, with Rogen and Goldberg on board, I feel like they can bring something different to it that we haven't really seen in the more recent Ninja Turtles adaptations.
Chris, what's your relationship like with the Ninja Turtles franchise? Did you grow up caring about that at all?
Yeah, I liked them, and I remember liking the original live action movie. I remember thinking it was such a big deal that Raphael said "damn" in it. It was a really big deal to young Chris Evangelista that the Ninja Turtles were cursing. But beyond that, I don't really have any. I don't have any interest in them now.
Yeah, I sort of tapped out. I think I watched the first Michael Bay era Ninja Turtles movie and just skipped, what was it called? Out of the Shadows or Out of the Shell or whatever that sequel was. And then I skipped that CG animated one that you were talking about before, Brad. I think it was the 2007 movie. I just didn't really like the animation style. I think that has a lot to do with it for me personally, is like whether or not I am on board with how these things look. And I think if you bring like a cool, like a Spider-Verse look to something like this, I think that would be, that would go a long way in pulling people in who might otherwise, be like kind of over this franchise after it's been around for so long. But yeah, we'll have to see what they end up doing there. Okay, let's move on to our last story of the day. And that is one of the most inexplicable sequels that I can think of in recent memory. Chris, tell us what is being developed.
There is a D.A.R.Y.L TV series in the works with Tony Hale. D.A.R.Y.L being the 1985 movie about a boy who is also a robot. I never saw this movie. I actually have never even heard of it, but apparently it was a thing. And now they're making a TV show, a sequel about it. And if you think that's a silly idea, it seems like the people making the show also think it's a silly idea, and that's part of the pitch for the show. I will read the little log line they have here. What if a top secret 10-year-old human weapon grew up to be a 44-year-old guy just trying to keep up with a world he was never designed for? So in other words, D.A.R.Y.L was cutting edge tech in the 80s, but now he's an adult and he's pretty much obsolete, but he's still around. So even though I haven't seen the movie and I have no connection to it, I do admit that that's a very amusing approach to this. It's literally taking like this, we know this is a dumb idea and we're leaning into it approach. So I can appreciate that.
What do you think about Tony Hale, Chris, as a performer? Do you think he's a decent fit for this?
Yeah, he's very funny, and he seems like exactly the right person to play a former robot boy who is now an adult robot man.
I remember, I think my mom showed me D.A.R.Y.L when I was probably, 8 years old or something, and I saw it one time and really just completely forgot all about it until this news came up, and I was like, oh yeah, I saw that once, but I have no lasting memories of the experience of watching it at all. And Brad, I think you had sort of a similar thing, right? You watched this as a kid but don't really remember anything about it.
Yeah, I've definitely seen it, and I remember the cover art for the VHS and like what the title treatment looks like and everything, but I couldn't even begin to tell you what happens in that movie.
But you were talking in our Slack channel about how you thought that there's some pretty good potential for comedy here. What do you think about that? You want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, because it's obviously it's weird to make a sequel like this to a movie that a lot of people barely remember. It's one of those things where you immediately think, oh, cool, Disney's just trying to cash on something that seems vaguely familiar. But in this case, I feel like there's probably something interesting here because the premise itself is a fun one. You're taking a character and bringing them in and focusing on them in a time when they feel obsolete and outcast. And I think that there's just, a good amount of potential there, not just for comedy, but for something that maybe even be, heartfelt and genuine. And Tony Hale, as silly as the comedies are that he's been in, there's always been an element to them where there's, authenticity and it's grounded and it never feels like it's too outlandish. At least the stuff that he's done that has really, resonated with audiences, especially on television. So yeah, I feel like there's at the very least potential here, and this sounds more interesting than just a simple cash grab to a Disney brand.
Chris, you said this is being developed by TNT and TBS. Do you know which one it's going to ultimately end up on? Does the original story say anything about that?
I closed the story, so let me reopen it. Because
no,
it does. No,
it's fine.
TBS is the answer.
Okay, so Chris, let me ask you: have you ever watched a TBS original show before?
Absolutely not.
Okay, I thought that might be the answer. Brad, I think TBS I don't actually, this may be even dating myself, but I don't even know if this is still true or not. But I think for a long time, TBS was really trying to brand themselves as a comedy friendly network. I have no idea if that's still the case, but have you, as the resident comedy guru of Slash Film, have you ever watched a TBS original show?
That is a good question. I would have to go and double check to make sure that I would know which ones were TBS, because there are some that obviously I remember, but I don't think that there's any that I'm currently watching. I know that I was interested in Miracle Workers, the anthology series that stars Daniel Radcliffe, but But I haven't. I actually haven't taken the time to sit down and watch it yet. So beyond that, I don't think that there's anything else that I've paid attention to on there. I've heard Search Party is good. But that's over on HBO Max now. I heard the Detour was really funny. But yeah, beyond that, no, I haven't checked out anything except for their late night offerings when Conan was or Conan is still there, mm-hmm. and Samantha Bee's show as well. So
okay, all right. Well, I'm glad that you mentioned Search Party and what was the one with Daniel Radcliffe? I've already forgotten the name because I wanted to watch that as well.
Miracle Workers.
Miracle Workers. Okay, yeah. So just the very fact that those exist and are getting good buzz, even though it's definitely niche audiences watching those shows, gives me a little bit more hope for D.A.R.Y.L. I was really worried that this might be the only show that TBS ultimately has that people might potentially care about, the only original that is, and that it might be just completely lost. And I guess that's still possible, but at least there's some precedent for people tuning into that network to watch original comedies like this.
Also, I just realized that I might have made it sound like I was referring to D.A.R.Y.L as a Disney movie, but it was merely just an association of that Disney likes to do those kinds of things.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's that's been their entire past 2 decades, so their entire business model, basically. So, okay. All right. I think that's going to bring us to the end of today's episode of Slash Film Daily. You can find more about all of the stories that we mentioned on today's show at slashfilm.com. I encourage you all to go there and check out a bunch of the stories that we have up. We reviewed Hamilton recently. We have interviews with the people who are involved with that. So check that out if you're looking for some Hamilton content. That movie drops on Disney Plus this Friday. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday. Actually, it used to be published every weekday. Now I think we're only down to 3 days a week, bringing the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on all of the popular podcast apps. Send us your feedback, questions, comments, and concerns at peter@slashfilm.com. And you can leave your name and general geographic location, and we might mention your email on the air if we ever do another mailbag episode again. Don't forget also to rate and review the podcast on iTunes. Take a couple seconds and do that for us. It helps us out a lot. Tell your friends, spread the word about the show. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you guys next time.